The reason that we have a need to do a comprehensive rezoning is because in 2006 we passed a comprehensive plan, and in some cases the type of redevelopment called for in the comprehensive plan simply wasn't even possible based on our current zoning ordinance. For example, there were sections of Washington Avenue that we envisioned getting redeveloped with buildings being pulled up to the street, and our current ordinance doesn't allow that to happen. So that's just one example. In other cases, there were communities that have evolved to be something, and the zoning that we have now assumes that it's something else. So for all those reasons, we really needed to tweak in a major way our current zoning ordinance. And in other cases, we had dozens of requests that had been out in the community for zoning changes that we were able to address by doing a comprehensive rezoning. So in many cases, when we've made changes, that's something that came directly out of the community. So it's very challenging. You know, when you rezone an entire town, there's a lot of technical things that have to happen in terms of the wording and how things are phrased. And the other thing that's really challenging is you're just never going to create a legitimate new ordinance with changes where everybody in the town is going to be happy. So we did really try to take in as much community input as we could. We had an informational gathering session where every single resident where we were recommending a change was sent a letter. They were invited to a meeting where we just basically opened up the floor to let people voice concerns, and you know, we took in as much feedback as we could and then made the decisions that we thought were appropriate based on each community and what's called for in the comp plan. And it's very challenging. I mean, being on the Planning Commission as a volunteer it's a very thankless job. I can count on my one hand. In fact, there's never been a person that's come to one of our meetings to say, hey, you guys are doing a great job. In fact, it's usually the opposite. They're there because they don't like how they're zoned, or they want to change, or they're there to build something. And even when there's a nice project, almost invariably, we tell developers, hey, we'd like to see more landscaping here, more sidewalks over there. We're basically telling them to spend more money. And you're the bearer of bad news in that respect. So it's a very, very tough job. But the reason that we do it is because it's also a really important job. You know, all 7 members are really committed to Chestertown and want to see it grow and prosper in the future. I think in many cases, the zoning that we had was still pretty good. So I think one good thing is that whoever wrote the original ordinance did a pretty good job. I think in many respects, some of the positive changes are, as I said earlier, where neighborhoods evolved from, say, being in a C2 area where really most of that block has now become residential, where the street basically evolved to be not really compatible with a 36-year-old zone that was designated for a long time ago. So I think in that respect, we were able to change some streets and just make it more representative of what's actually there now. I think Washington Avenue and High Street Extended, for example, we created a new zone, this C3 zone, where we've given, we think, developers tools to potentially redevelop those areas in a manner that is more pedestrian friendly and we think more aesthetically pleasing. It's important to note that that new zone doesn't compel any of the current owners to change their properties in any way. And I think one of the toughest things about the Planning Commission is when misinformation gets out there, when people hear, hey, you're being changed from C1 to C3, people view change as a negative, and they don't always, they become very emotional because it's their property. And I understand that, but a really tough job for us is to move beyond that emotional argument and say, hey, look, you can continue to run your business just as it is, but if you ever decide to sell, we're going to give you a residential option on top. You know, we're going to allow you to pull your building to the street or allow the new owner to do that. And so that was a real challenge. But I think the C3 zone, you know, 20, 30 years from now, those parts of town could look very different, and I think could look more appealing and be more friendly to the pedestrian. I personally think the institutional zone is a good thing. We created this new zone for really mainly the college and the hospital, but also any other institutions like churches and schools, and really drew a footprint around them. And in doing so, in theory, that should be comforting to the neighbors that live around these institutions. It sets a very clear message to the institutions where the town would like to see them grow, It eliminates a planning step for the institution where before, like for example, the college was zoned R3. They were basically zoned as a duplex residential area. And so every time the college wanted to do something on their campus, they had to go to the Board of Appeals and prove they were still a college. So the institutional zone streamlined the process for the institution. It also requires them to give us master plans so we can see what they're thinking. And all those things I think are positive. I know as someone that lives basically between the college and the hospital, it was really nerve-wracking for me several years ago when they started buying properties all around my house. And it was really unclear as to where they were going to be allowed to grow into my neighborhood. So hopefully for the residents, it gives them a little more peace of mind as well. Well, I think it's important to remember that even though these institutions now have institutional zones, I think that's a misconception that they can just do whatever they want. They still need to come to the Planning Commission, and we still need to sign on the bottom line with whatever they want to do. And frankly, in this town, I've been around for 20 years now, if there's enough people in the community that oppose something, if they make their voices heard, the college and the hospital, it's in their best interest to respond to our community. We're really their life support. I mean, we support them, and they add great benefits to the community, so it works both ways. And you know, I don't believe that just because we've given them an institutional zone and in some ways it streamlines the process for them, they still need to get approvals, and it still needs to work for the community. And so we're not just going to pass anything they run before us without giving them the feedback that we call for in the comp plan. I think there's a big misconception out there that if you come to the Planning Commission and you express your concerns about your property, that we're going to give you what you want every single time. I mean, we are a commission, you know, and that's one of the hardest parts of the job. You might have very valid concerns, and we might disagree with why your unit got to be dilapidated or what have you. One of the things that the Park Row group argued was that C2 was too restrictive in terms of allowing them to generate revenue with their buildings. But actually C2 is really one of our more liberal zones in the community for generating revenue from a single property. And I think a lot of people had misconceptions about what you can actually do with C2, which is a lot of the downtown commercial is C2. And what C2 does allow is retail or professional office on the first floor. By professional office, that can be lawyers, accountants, things of that nature. And then on the second floor of C2, you can have residential. You can also have more office or more retail. What they wanted was a zone that they essentially created, that apparently they had borrowed some text from other communities. They called historic district mixed use. What they wanted was the option of also having residential on the first floor, and they wanted to also keep their right to have, or their ability to have commercial and professional office. And the problem, the reason that that zone doesn't exist in our code is because we think it's problematic. At the end of the day, looking at Park Row, several of our commission members also had concerns about first floor residential on Park Row because of where it is, right in front of Fountain Park, which if you think about how the town uses Fountain Park, it's probably the busiest public space in the whole community. Every single Saturday, just to pick one example, we have a very successful farmers market. So every Saturday morning, from April through Christmas, you have vendors setting up, which would essentially be right in these people's front yards at around 6 or 7 in the morning. And you know, I've been around the town long enough to know that that is going to be a volatile situation eventually. Because you've got to also consider that if you give Park Row first floor residential, the whole thing could become first floor residential. And would that be a good use, mix of uses? And several of our commission members thought it would. And there's one other thing is that when you start mixing in residences and juxtaposing them next to, sandwiching them between retail operations, it breaks up a natural flow that you get in a business district. And as an example, I'll use Upper High Street, the 300 block of High Street. When you get up to about Lulu's, there's one more red brick building that's clearly commercial in design, and then there's 2 duplexes. And if I'm already on the edge of the marketplace and I'm a visitor to Chestertown, I see those duplexes after Lulu's, and it sends me the message that you're out of the retail district. So what am I going to do? I'm probably going to turn around and go back into town, and that's what people do. And if you've been around town, you know that above those duplexes, there's been a revolving door of failing retail operations. And so that's another reason why we don't like that concept of just having all those uses, residential, commercial, and professional office, all potentially side by side by side. And that's why that was the basis of our disagreement with those residents. And it's unfortunate because I know they felt that we weren't listening to them. And the fact of the matter was, we heard them loud and clear, we just disagreed with them. And it's hard to convey that in a manner that, I don't know, is compassionate and, allows them to feel like they were heard. We definitely heard them and we just disagreed with them. Well, a new zone that we created is a zone called C3, which is still primarily a commercial zone. And the C3 zone basically runs from about the end of the college's campus up to the banks on the corner of Morgan Neck and Route 213. It also runs about from Aquafit out High Street extended down to almost to Radcliffe Mill. And what the comprehensive plan calls for in those two areas is redevelopment sometime down the road as those properties change hands. If you think about the aesthetics of those areas of town, you have a lot of businesses that are set back from the street, fronted by asphalt parking lots with lots and lots of curb cuts and sometimes sidewalks that kind of end at parking lots, which sends kind of a dangerous but also just a mixed and confusing message to pedestrians. So in the comprehensive plan, we envisioned a redevelopment of those areas where future buildings would be pulled up to the street with sidewalks and landscaping and parking either to the side of the business or behind or to the side and behind. Our current ordinance had mandatory 50-foot setbacks, which basically doesn't allow what we call for in the comp plan to happen. So C3 basically created a setback that allowed buildings to be pulled up closer to the street. We also wanted to give future owners of those properties a residential option so that they could have mixed use. That's one of the fundamental assumptions in the comp plan, is that mixed uses are desirable. That's the way businesses used to be built back in the day, and we'd like to see that continue in those parts of town. So we allowed those business owners to have an option of putting a revenue generating apartment on the second floor, again, above their retail operations. A lot of the business owners, especially in the Washington Avenue section where we're talking about, were concerned that the new zone would compel them to take out their parking that's currently in front of their businesses and move it to the side or behind them. In fact, that's not the case. They're essentially grandfathered in, they're still conforming uses, and if they want to run their business exactly as it is for the next 100 years, they can do that. Furthermore, if they sell their business and the next owner wants to continue that business exactly as it is, they can do that as well. We simply wanted to give tools to future owners of those properties. If they wanted to ever knock one of those buildings down, or if a building became so dilapidated, we would be compelled to knock it down, that any new construction, any redevelopment would at least be allowed to pull the building up to the street, and would probably be encouraged to do so by the Planning Commission, because we feel that's a more aesthetically pleasing design. And again, we think mixed use is a good thing, and we think it could work on that part of Washington Avenue and on that part of High Street. So we needed to create a new zone that allowed that to happen, as it's called for in the comp plan. I mean, when you break down the town lot by lot by lot and cover every single lot, it's amazing the little nooks and crannies that you discover that you probably walked or drove by them a million times. And you got to remember that those residents have just as much emotion and concern about their properties as the ones that are like prominently displayed on the river as you drive over the bridge. So that's been a really interesting realization and kind of an eye-opener for me, that wow, there's really a lot more to the town than the part that the tourists come through. And you always need to keep that in mind. I think looking forward, this is kind of my personal concern. I worry about our waterfront. I think the college's potential campus down there is a real win-win for the town and the college. The marina, I know, has been very controversial, and there's people that are just super for the town buying it, and people that are super against it. But I see that as a really critical piece of the waterfront, that whatever happens to it, it's got to be done in a manner that preserves the waterfront access for boaters and saves those slips. If we were to lose that marina, whether it's through have it being condominiumized or whether the town just simply can't raise funds to renovate it. I think that's going to be just a tragic loss for a town that has been a port since 1706. I think Rails to Trails is a really exciting initiative. I know right now the funding is very tight, but I think that has the potential to really spur redevelopment right on out High Street all the way to Radcliffe Mill. It has the potential to really encourage more college students to come and utilize the downtown area, which I don't think they do enough. And I think it would be a great recreational thing for everybody, especially somebody like me with little kids. What a great loop. 4 miles doesn't seem like a lot, but that's a pretty big loop for a town of our size. And so I think that has a lot of exciting potential, both recreationally and economically. So those are some of the things that I think in the near-term future, if we can make those happen in a way that's a win-win for everybody, that can really enhance what we already have. And I want to also emphasize that I think people forget a lot of times when they live here just how special this town is. I mean, I do through my job, a lot of walking tours with groups from the other side of the bay. And I do a lot of walking tours with groups from the lower eastern shore. And every group, somebody says, just while we're walking up the street, you have such a gorgeous little town here. And I think people forget that a lot of times. It is a special place, and that's why I am on the commission, and that's why my commission members do what we do for no pay, for a lot of headache, because we like this place and we think it's worth working to enhance and preserve.
Perfect.